Today's story is about something that happened with a homeowner association, or rather, the president of one, and how he ended up stealing electricity from someone who wasn't even part of their HOA. Let me tell you how it all went down. So, the person telling this story lives right next to an HOA, but not within its boundaries. That means they're not a member and couldn't be even if they wanted to. While they definitely weren't a fan of HOAs in general, they had to admit, this particular one looked pretty nice. They'd built a fancy clubhouse with a pool, a hot tub, and even a well-equipped gym. If they were ever going to be stuck in an HOA, they wouldn't have minded being part of one like this. But things started getting weird about a year after the clubhouse was completed. Their electric bill began spiking, not just slightly, like most people might expect with normal yearly increases, but a lot. We're talking levels that didn't make sense for a single-family home. More like what you'd expect for a small office building. They did some research online and realized this wasn't normal at all. Around the same time, the HOA was publicly struggling financially. There were rumors about increasing dues, and members were clearly concerned. But despite the money issues, the clubhouse stayed open and active, which struck the neighbor as odd. Not being part of the HOA, they didn't pay much attention to the inner workings of it. They figured it wasn't their problem, so they didn't think too hard about it. Still, when the electric bills kept climbing, they decided to call an electrician. They assumed there was some kind of electrical malfunction on their property causing the surge in usage. The electrician came out, checked everything thoroughly, and found something completely unexpected. Hidden wiring that ran from the neighbor's house straight to the HOA clubhouse. Yes, the HOA had literally run illegal wiring from this neighbor's electrical system into their own clubhouse, siphoning off power without permission. And considering how close the neighbor lived to the clubhouse, the wires had been easy to install and easy to hide. The next step was obvious: confront the HOA president. So the neighbor stormed into his office, showed him photos of the wiring, and demanded he remove it immediately and reimburse them for the inflated bills. The president didn't take kindly to being confronted. He tried to play it off as a temporary fix due to extraordinary circumstances, and then pulled out the HOA bylaws to justify it. He claimed that the HOA had the right to use residential utilities during emergencies without reimbursement. There were so many problems with that excuse. First, the neighbor wasn't even part of the HOA. Second, this wasn't an emergency, it was a financial issue. And third, even in real emergencies, common decency would suggest the HOA should compensate the person whose power they were using. The neighbor made it clear they didn't buy any of it and told the president they'd cut the wires themselves if he didn't remove them. That's when things got ugly. The president started making veiled threats, suggesting that maybe the HOA would need access to the neighbor's water next, and that if the neighbor continued pushing back, the HOA wouldn't be able to protect them anymore. It felt less like a homeowner dispute and more like a mafia shakedown. After being cursed out and sent away, the neighbor hired a lawyer and learned something surprising: utility theft is shockingly common. The lawyer also explained that what the HOA was doing was a serious felony. The longer it went on, the worse the consequences could be for the HOA. Legally, the neighbor had several options. They could get reimbursed for the stolen electricity, plus additional damages for the trouble. They also reported the theft to the authorities, especially since the wiring was dangerous. In the meantime, they had a second meter installed so they could accurately track how much power was being stolen. This way, if things went to court, they'd have solid documentation. They also took matters into their own hands in a clever way. Once they had the separate meter, they sent the detailed readings along with all their evidence to the rest of the HOA board. They warned that if the president wasn't acting alone, the entire board could be held personally liable. The idea was to pressure them into stepping in, or at least proving they weren't involved. Meanwhile, the local utility company noticed the abnormal power usage and sent someone out to investigate. The neighbor pointed them directly to the HOA and explained the situation. The inspector confirmed that the amount of power being used was not only suspicious, but potentially dangerous. Then came the big HOA party, a celebration of the clubhouse's one-year anniversary. There was a DJ, lights, and plenty of other power-hungry equipment. The neighbor knew this was going to push the stolen electricity usage through the roof. So they bought a timer and set it to cut power to the stolen line about 30 minutes after the party started. Sure enough, the music cut out. The HOA president showed up with police, claiming the neighbor had sabotaged the event out of jealousy for not being an HOA member. But when the neighbor showed the police the illegal wiring, the utility report, and proof of the ongoing lawsuit, the president's story fell apart. The cops listened, the crowd gathered, and everyone heard exactly what had been going on. The president tried to fall back on the same excuse: the bylaws, the emergency, the permission, but nobody believed him. The rest of the HOA board, realizing how bad this looked, quickly distanced themselves. They said they had no idea what he'd done and weren't involved. With no support and mounting public shame, the president finally agreed to settle out of court. He paid back the electricity costs, covered legal fees, and compensated the neighbor for the hassle. He was removed from his position. Obviously, nobody trusted him with HOA funds anymore. The clubhouse was scaled back to weekend-only hours until the HOA could recover financially. Criminally, the president also faced fines and narrowly avoided jail time. He ended up on some kind of probation-like status where another offense could land him behind bars. The whole thing became a major scandal in the community. The neighbor used the settlement money to install solar panels, both to lower their electricity bills and to make it harder for anyone to pull a stunt like this again. Solar power gave them more control over their energy usage and a little extra peace of mind. Alright, let's move on to another story. And this one is a fantastic example of malicious compliance done just right. It's titled, "Don't Want to Pay 4 Guys to Not Work for 6 Hours? Then you can pay 30 guys to not work for 6 hours. So here's the setup. The narrator works as a manager for a North American railroad. A big part of their job involves coordinating with different teams, each with its own union, rules, and schedules. The track crew, for example, has 3 shifts: day, evening, and night, while the signal crew only works during the day. And if the signal team works overnight, they have to clock out after 12 hours and still get paid for the rest of the day to go home and sleep. Now, upper management, or as the narrator puts it, the big hats, had this brilliant idea. Instead of paying some workers to leave early on Thursday, come in for overtime at 10 p.m., work until 10 a.m. Friday, then get another 4 hours of pay to go home and rest. They decided that wasn't efficient enough. So what did they do? They decided that the second shift crew should stay an extra 4 hours and the first shift crew should come in 4 hours early. Seems simple enough, right? Except there were a ton of problems with this plan. First off, the narrator couldn't just force employees to work overtime unless it was an emergency, and apparently, not affecting train traffic doesn't qualify as an emergency. Plus, not all employees were even qualified for the same tasks. Second, the company had cut costs years earlier by taking away half the trucks, meaning there weren't enough vehicles for a full second crew to show up at 2 a.m. and relieve the current team. That meant whoever was working would have to pack up, drive back to the office, let the relief crew load up and drive back out, do all the paperwork and safety briefings, and then start the actual work. And here's the kicker. While all that was happening, the track crew couldn't even begin their work because the narrator's team had to remove certain equipment from the tracks before the track guys could operate, and then reinstall it afterwards so trains could run in the morning. The narrator tried explaining all this, but no one was listening. At the center of this chaos was a young manager fresh out of college, a guy who opened every conversation with, "I have an MBA, damn it." He insisted this new scheduling system would solve everything and improve those all-important metrics like percent spent versus percent complete. Classic corporate speak. After making it clear on the meeting record that this was a terrible idea, the narrator stepped back and let the disaster unfold, because honestly, what else could you do? On the first night, things went exactly as expected. Work ground to a halt at 1 a.m. The second crew didn't arrive until 4:15 a.m., and by the time they got started, there wasn't enough time left to get anything meaningful done before sunrise. On the second night, things improved slightly. They managed to do a little bit of work before calling it quits. Nights 3 and 4? Heavy rain slowed everything down even more. By Monday morning, the results were in. The track crew had completed about 30% of the planned work for the week, which meant a 6-week job was now projected to take over 15 weeks and cost more than 300% over budget. The MBA guy showed up ready to give his big speech about key performance indicators and how progress had been egregiously eroded, and then he turned on the narrator, accusing them of conspiring with employees to sabotage the project. That's when the narrator pulled out the meeting minutes from the previous week, where the MBA himself had demanded the full shift change in the middle of the track crew's schedule. He was asked, quite pointedly, if he wanted to revise that position. Unwilling to admit fault, the MBA doubled down and insisted that somehow, magically, the shift change needed to happen faster next time. For the next 3 weeks, the same pattern repeated itself. After a month, the crew had barely completed a week and a half of work. Then came the final straw. The MBA showed up on site one night just in time to see the night crew walking off the job and the track crew shutting down machines to hang out, smoke, and relax for the next few hours since they were getting paid anyway. When the narrator arrived, they found the MBA screaming at everyone to get back to work. But none of the crews moved, partly out of solidarity, partly because they knew they couldn't work without the narrator's team handling the rail equipment. The narrator stepped in and calmly reminded the MBA that telling anyone to violate specific safety rules, like running equipment through a switch that hadn't been checked, could result in serious consequences, including suspensions. And if he suggested it, there would be 30 witnesses ready to confirm it. The MBA turned bright red, stormed off, and within 2 weeks was quietly removed from overseeing estimates, probably because he couldn't hide the massive cost overruns from his boss anymore. In total, his brilliant scheduling idea cost the company over $940,000 across 6 weeks, though he did manage to save about $700 a night on off-hours labor costs. So small victories? Needless to say, the MBA learned a very expensive lesson, and the narrator got to sit back and watch it all unfold, knowing they'd called it from the beginning. Now, let's jump into another HOA story, this one involving a Karen who thought she could flex her power until the neighborhood rallied together and took her down. This story starts with the narrator's dad, a genuinely kind, helpful man who lived in a typical suburban neighborhood with an HOA. He was well-liked, always willing to lend a hand, and had helped maintain community spaces, organize events, and even lent tools to neighbors. His late father-in-law had owned a chain of hardware stores, so he had every tool imaginable, and he used them to help keep the neighborhood looking great. But here's the problem: he had too many tools and not enough space. His garage was overflowing, and he often needed bigger tools for neighborhood projects. So he built a modest 6 by 8 foot shed in the backyard to store everything, carefully designed to blend in with the house. It was painted to match, had matching roofing, and was surrounded by trees so it wasn't visible from the street or any neighbor's yard. If you squinted, it looked like a tiny playhouse. Enter Karen, the newly elected HOA president who had taken it upon herself to crack down on every minor rule violation imaginable. Within a week of the shed being built, she showed up at the narrator's dad's door. "You can't have that building out back," she said. He responded with a calm explanation. "It's not visible from the street. I designed it to look like my house. And as you know, Karen, I donate tools and time to the neighborhood. This will allow me to help even more." Karen was unmoved. "It's against the rules. Remove it by the end of the month or you'll be fined." Dad pushed back gently. "You have a playhouse for your daughter in your backyard. Isn't that the same size?" "No," Karen snapped. "Yours is different. Remove it or we'll fine you." She walked away smugly, handing him a notice of potential penalties. But something she said stuck with him, especially since she had a playhouse in her own yard. So he dug into the HOA rulebook and found something interesting. There was a clause allowing members to install art pieces in their backyard, and it didn't specify a maximum size. His wife happened to be an artist. Within days, the shed was transformed. License plates covered the sides, a window was cut into the door in the shape of an octagon, and then came the piece de resistance, a 7-foot-tall bird statue made entirely of license plates, with a ceramic smiley face and a giant purple feather boa. Suddenly, the shed was very visible from both the neighbors' yards and the busy street behind the house. The next day, Karen returned. "What is that thing in your backyard? And why is the structure still there?" "It's an art installation," Dad replied. "I don't care. You have to remove it immediately." "Nope. The HOA allows art installations in the backyard." "I'm following the rules." Karen sputtered in frustration. "We'll vote on it at the next HOA meeting." Dad knew what she was planning. She'd try to get a rule change passed to force him to remove the shed. But Dad had a secret weapon: margaritas. He loved making them. So much so that he had a cart set up in his garage, loaded with everything he needed. And whenever he put out a pirate flag by his mailbox, neighbors knew it was margarita time. Over the next couple of weeks, he hosted regular gatherings inviting neighbors, chatting, laughing, and sharing drinks. Everyone loved it. Then came the big HOA meeting. The room was packed, so full, people were lined up outside. Karen had no idea these were all the folks Dad had helped over the years, neighbors who owed him favors, borrowed his tools, or simply liked him. She launched into the meeting, jumped straight into the vote, and asked, "All in favor of having Dad remove the art installation?" Only a few hands went up, mostly Karen's friends. All opposed. Every single person in the room raised their hand. Karen lost badly. Dad could have won with just a quarter of the crowd. Her presidency didn't last much longer after that. As for what happened to Karen, nobody really knows. But the rumor is she moved out shortly after. And just like that, a clever dad used a little creativity, a lot of community goodwill, and a cart full of margaritas to outsmart a power-hungry HOA president. Now onto another story, this one about a woman who tried to scam an art store and ended up banned for life. This one comes from someone who worked at a pop-up shop in a mall during the holiday season. The shop sold paintings ranging from $50 to $1,000, and staff rotated in and out daily. One night, a woman, who we'll call Karen, came in and bought over $2,000 worth of paintings. She was friendly, talkative, and asked a lot of questions, including about the return policy. At the time, the policy was simple. Customers could return any painting until the pop-up closed. A couple of weeks later, the shop started discounting paintings, slashing prices to get rid of inventory. Karen came back, again and again, returning paintings, then buying the same ones at the discounted price. Eventually, the store caught on and changed the policy to no returns at all, posting signs around the shop. Fast forward to near closing time, when Karen returned once more, arms full of paintings, ready to return them. The employee, a young woman in her 20s, explained the new policy. Karen flipped out. "You told me I could return them until the shop closed." "I did," the employee said, "but the policy has changed." Karen demanded to speak to the manager, who arrived shortly after. Same message: no returns. Policy had changed. Karen began crying, insisting she'd been promised the ability to return the paintings. When asked to leave and she refused, security was called. The employee, visibly shaking from anxiety and adrenaline, was sent to the back to calm down. Once composed, she returned to find Karen standing outside, arms crossed. Later, the manager explained, police confirmed the no-return policy, declared Karen trespassing, and escorted her out. She kept insisting she should have been allowed to return the paintings based on what the employee had originally told her, but by then, it was over. Karen was banned from the shop. And sometimes, that's how it goes. when you try to pull a fast one on a holiday pop-up store. Finally, let's wrap up with a bonus story from the /r/Petty Revenge subreddit. It's titled, Mr. Chipmunk's Revenge. The narrator was a teacher who had a particularly difficult student one year, a girl who was nasty to everyone, but especially to her English teacher. He was a big guy, nearly 400 pounds, and had thick hair everywhere, including on his neck and back. He had DC comic posters on his classroom walls, including Batman. She gave him the nickname Mr. Chipmunk, mocking his hairy arms and neck, and also called him Fat Man. Despite that, he was a beloved teacher, jolly, kind, and respected by students and staff alike. Years later, after the student graduated, she became a licensed physical therapist. Meanwhile, the teacher slipped on a wet floor with no warning sign and injured his lower back. He filed a workers' comp claim and was referred for physical therapy at the clinic where she worked. He requested her specifically. 3 times a week, she had to work on his huge, sweaty, hairy back. And he made sure to tell everyone about it. He even admitted he wouldn't use the AC in his car on the way to PT, so his back would be a hot, sweaty mess when she had to wipe it down before starting treatment. Revenge may be petty, but sometimes it's perfect,